In just 22 seconds, one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses went from gracious guest to absolutely furious, her famous smile completely vanishing as she faced down Joy Behar in what witnesses are calling the most explosive confrontation in The View's history. What started as light banter about Julia Roberts' latest film quickly devolved into a character assassination that left the pretty woman star shaking with rage, her publicist frantically signaling from the wings, and the studio audience sitting in stunned, uncomfortable silence as America's sweetheart finally reached her breaking point. The tension was palpable from the moment Julia Roberts walked onto the View set. While the other co-hosts greeted her warmly, Joy Behar's expression remained notably cool, almost calculating. Roberts, radiant in a flowing emerald dress that complemented her famous red hair, settled into the guest chair with her characteristic warmth, but there was something different in her demeanor today. A slight edge, perhaps from the grueling press tour she'd been on for weeks. "So Julia, let's talk about your new movie," Whoopi began diplomatically. But Joy immediately cut in with a sharp interruption. "Actually, before we get to that promotional stuff, I think our viewers deserve some honesty here," Joy said, her voice carrying that familiar condescending tone that had become her trademark. "Julia, you've been in Hollywood for what, 35 years now? And yet you still play these same roles, the charming, quirky woman who gets the guy. Don't you think it's time to, I don't know, grow up a little?" The studio fell silent. Robert's smile flickered for just a moment before she recovered, but anyone watching closely could see her jaw tighten slightly. "Well, Joy, I think audiences connect with stories about real people finding love and happiness. There's nothing wrong with bringing joy to people's lives." "Joy to people's lives," Joy repeated mockingly. "How convenient that you'd use that word. But let's be real here. Isn't it more about the paycheck? I mean, these romantic comedies aren't exactly Shakespeare, are they?" Roberts shifted in her chair, her publicist now visibly concerned from the sidelines. "I think there's value in all kinds of storytelling, Joy. Not everything has to be a heavy drama to have meaning." Right. Joy nodded dismissively, then leaned forward with predatory interest. "But speaking of meaning, let's talk about your personal life for a moment. You've been married to Danny Moder for over 20 years now, which by Hollywood standards is practically a miracle. But there have been whispers, haven't there, about the real reason you moved to that ranch in New Mexico. Some people say you're hiding something." The other co-hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sunny Hostin looked like she wanted to intervene, while Sarah Haynes appeared genuinely shocked by the direction of the questioning. Robert's famous composure was beginning to crack, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "I moved to New Mexico because I wanted to give my children a normal life, away from the Hollywood fishbowl," Roberts replied, her voice still controlled, but with a new steeliness underneath. "I'm not hiding from anything." "Really?" Joy pressed, clearly enjoying the discomfort she was creating. "Because word around town is that your marriage isn't quite the fairy tale you sell to the magazines. Danny's been spending an awful lot of time in Los Angeles lately, while you're playing house on the ranch. Doesn't sound very romantic to me." Robert's eyes flashed dangerously. "My marriage is none of your business, Joy." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong," Joy shot back with a cruel smile. "When you make millions selling America this image of the perfect wife and mother, it becomes everyone's business. You can't have it both ways, sweetheart." The condescending use of sweetheart was the match that lit the fuse. Roberts leaned forward, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting would have. "Don't you dare call me sweetheart. And don't you dare sit there and pretend you know anything about my life or my family." Joy's eyes lit up with the thrill of having struck a nerve. "Touched a nerve, did I? Look, Julia, I'm just asking the questions that people want to know. Why are you getting so defensive?" "Defensive?" Roberts laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You ambush me with tabloid gossip disguised as interview questions, and you think I'm being defensive? This is exactly the kind of toxic bullshit that drives people away from this business." The audience gasped at the unexpected profanity from America's sweetheart. But Roberts was just getting started. Her famous temper, usually kept carefully in check, was finally beginning to show. Language, Joy tutted mockingly. Such anger from someone who's supposed to be all sunshine and rainbows. Maybe this is the real Julia Roberts coming out? You want to see the real me? Roberts stood up abruptly, towering over the seated co-hosts. The real me thinks you're a bitter, jealous woman who gets off on tearing down successful people because your own career peaked 20 years ago doing stand-up in dive bars. The studio erupted. Audience members were murmuring in shock. Cameras were zooming in for reaction shots. And the other co-hosts looked like deer caught in headlights. Joy's face had gone red with fury, but she was far from backing down. At least I earned my success through talent, not by sleeping my way through leading men, Joy snarled, finally dropping all pretense of civility. That was the line that should never have been crossed. Roberts went completely still, her face pale except for 2 bright spots of color on her cheeks. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet that the audience had to strain to hear her. But every word was perfectly clear. What did you just say to me? The anticipation in the studio was suffocating, and what happened next would cement this confrontation as legendary. Joy, emboldened by the shocked silence, doubled down with a smirk that would haunt her career. You heard me perfectly. We all know how this town really works, Julia. Pretty faces open doors that talent alone can't. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Robert's chest rose and fell rapidly, her famous composure completely shattered. For a moment, she looked like she might actually lunge across the table, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You disgusting, pathetic excuse for a journalist, Roberts hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. You sit here day after day, hiding behind this desk, throwing stones at people who've actually accomplished something with their lives. What have you done, Joy? What's your legacy? Being the bitter bitch who asks the questions no decent person would ask? The audience was in complete shock. Several people were covering their mouths, others were pulling out phones to record, and a few were actually standing up to get a better view of the carnage unfolding before them. The other co-hosts looked absolutely mortified, but none seemed brave enough to intervene. Joy's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. How dare you speak to me like that? I've been doing this job since before you were sucking face on camera for money. Doing what job exactly? Roberts fired back, now pacing behind her chair like a caged animal. Ambushing guests? Spreading gossip? Destroying people for ratings? That's not journalism. That's vulture behavior. And you know what the really pathetic part is? You're not even good at being a vulture. You're just a sad, lonely woman who peaked in the 90s and never got over it. The production team was in complete chaos. Cameras were still rolling because nobody had the authority to stop them. And the director was frantically trying to figure out whether to go to commercial or let this train wreck continue. Robert's publicist was now standing at the edge of the set, gesturing frantically for her client to stop talking. Joy stood up abruptly, pointing an accusatory finger at Roberts. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? Miss Perfect with your perfect marriage and your perfect little ranch life. Well, here's a newsflash, princess. Nobody buys your act anymore. My act? Roberts laughed bitterly. The only person putting on an act here is you, Joy. This whole tough interviewer thing you do? It's just a cover for the fact that you're a failed comic who couldn't make it on talent alone, so you became a professional bully instead. At least I earned my money honestly. Honestly? Joy shrieked, completely losing any pretense of professionalism. You want to talk about honesty? Let's talk about why Danny really spends so much time in LA. Let's talk about the real reason you hide out in New Mexico. Let's talk about what the tabloids aren't printing. That was the moment Roberts finally snapped completely. She slammed her hand down on the table with such force that water glasses jumped and Whoopi actually flinched. You have crossed every single line that exists. You want to attack my career? Fine. You want to question my talent? Whatever. But you do not get to invent lies about my family. The veins in Robert's neck were visible as she leaned across the table, getting as close to Joy as physically possible. You are a disgrace to women everywhere. You sit here pretending to be some kind of feminist icon, but all you do is tear down other women. You're everything that's wrong with this business, wrapped up in one bitter, jealous package. Joy was now shaking with fury, her carefully applied makeup starting to run slightly from the heat of the studio lights, and her own rising blood pressure. You don't get to come on my show and insult me. This is my house. Your house? Roberts threw back her head and laughed with genuine amusement for the first time since the interview began. This isn't your house, Joy. This is Barbara Walters' house. You're just the current tenant, and from what I hear, your lease might be up sooner than you think. The implication hit Joy like a physical blow. There had indeed been whispers about her job security lately, and Roberts had just weaponized that knowledge with surgical precision. Joy's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. You can't. How dare you? Joy sputtered. But Roberts was far from finished. What's wrong, Joy? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just shocked that someone finally had the guts to call you out on your bullshit? You've been getting away with this toxic behavior for years because people are afraid of you. Well, guess what? I'm not afraid of a washed-up comedian who thinks being mean makes her relevant. Sunny Hostin finally found her voice, trying desperately to salvage something from the wreckage. Ladies, maybe we should take a step back here. No. Roberts whirled on her. Don't you dare try to both sides this. I came here in good faith to talk about my work, and this woman ambushed me with personal attacks and outright lies. There is no stepping back from this. Joy, sensing she was losing control of her own show, made one last desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. You know what, Julia? Maybe you should leave. Clearly, you can't handle real questions from real journalists. The suggestion that Joy was a real journalist was apparently the final straw. Robert's eyes went wide with incredulous rage, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the full weight of 3 decades in Hollywood, and all the power that came with it. Real journalist? You wouldn't know real journalism if it bit you on your surgically enhanced ass. And you know what? You're absolutely right. I should leave. But not because I can't handle your pathetic excuse for an interview. I'm leaving because staying here one more second would be an insult to every professional woman in America. Roberts grabbed her purse from beside her chair and slung it over her shoulder with dramatic flair. The studio was now in complete pandemonium, with audience members openly gasping and pointing, the other co-hosts looking like they wanted to crawl under the table, and cameras capturing every second of what was clearly becoming television history. But Roberts wasn't done. She had one final bomb to drop, and it would be the one that destroyed any chance of this ending quietly. You want to know what's really pathetic here, Joy? Roberts said, her voice now deadly calm in that way that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. You think you're exposing some big secret about my life, but the only thing you're exposing is how desperate and irrelevant you've become. Because here's what you don't know. What none of you gossiping vultures know. She paused for dramatic effect, looking directly into the camera with a commanding presence that had made her a movie star. Danny and I are stronger than we've ever been. Our marriage is rock solid. Our kids are thriving. And we chose to build our life away from toxic people like you. The only reason he's in LA more often lately is because he's directing a documentary about media harassment and how shows like this one destroy people's lives for entertainment. Joy's face went ashen. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted, but the genuine shock in her eyes proved it wasn't. That's right, Roberts continued, savoring every word. My husband is making a film about exactly this kind of predatory journalism. And congratulations, Joy, you just gave him the perfect ending. This entire disgusting display is going to be seen by millions of people who will finally understand what kind of person you really are. The studio had gone from chaotic to dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should keep filming or not. Joy looked like she might actually be sick, the realization of what she'd walked into finally hitting her. You set me up, Joy whispered. But there was no conviction in her voice. I didn't set up anything, Roberts replied with ice-cold satisfaction. You set yourself up. All I did was walk in here expecting a normal interview about my movie, and you chose to turn it into a character assassination. Every word that came out of your mouth was your choice, Joy. Own it. Whoopi finally found her courage, trying one last time to salvage the situation. Julia, maybe we can start over. Talk about your film. Roberts turned to face Whoopi, and there was genuine disappointment in her expression. Whoopi, I have nothing but respect for you. But sitting here while your co-host attacked my family and my integrity? That's not something we can just start over from. This isn't about having a bad day or asking tough questions. This was a calculated attempt to humiliate me on national television, and I won't pretend otherwise. Joy, realizing the full scope of the disaster she'd created, made one final, desperate attempt to regain control. This is ridiculous. I was just doing my job, asking the hard questions that... Your job? Roberts cut her off with a laugh that could have shattered glass. Your job is supposed to be informing and entertaining viewers, not spreading malicious gossip and attacking your guests' families. If this is your idea of journalism, then you need to find a new profession. She shouldered her purse more firmly and took a step toward the exit, but then turned back one final time, delivering her closing statement with the precision of a surgeon and the power of a sledgehammer. You know what the real tragedy is here, Joy? 20 years from now, when people remember this moment, they won't remember anything about my movie or my career. They'll remember how a bitter, jealous woman tried to destroy someone on live television and ended up destroying herself instead. You've just committed professional suicide, and you filmed it for posterity. Roberts looked directly into the main camera one last time. To the viewers at home who deserve better than this garbage, thank you for 30 years of support. You deserve hosts who lift people up, not tear them down. And you definitely deserve better than this. With that, she turned and walked toward the exit with the grace and dignity of someone who had just won the most important battle of her career. But Joy, in a final act of desperation that would seal her fate forever, couldn't let her have the last word. Run away, Julia. That's what you do best, isn't it? Run away to your little ranch when things get too real. Roberts stopped dead in her tracks. For a moment, it looked like she might actually turn around and finish the job. But instead, she did something far more devastating. She looked back over her shoulder with a smile that was pure poison and said, "Thanks for the final quote, Joy. Danny's going to love that one." Then she was gone, leaving behind a studio in complete shock, a co-host in ruins, and what would become the most viral television moment of the decade. The camera caught Joy's face in the aftermath, the dawning realization of what she'd done, the knowledge that she'd been outplayed at every turn, and the growing understanding that her career might have just ended on live television. The other co-hosts sat in stunned silence, unsure how to proceed. The audience was buzzing with excitement and disbelief. And somewhere in the control room, producers were frantically trying to figure out whether they'd just witnessed the worst disaster in the show's history or the greatest television moment ever filmed. In the days that followed, the confrontation would break the internet. Robert's final monologue would be clipped, shared, and quoted millions of times. Joy would face calls for her resignation from viewers, advertisers, and even some of her own colleagues. The video would become a masterclass in how to handle a media ambush with grace under fire, and how not to conduct an interview if you want to keep your job. But in that moment, as Roberts disappeared through the studio doors and left Joy sitting in the wreckage of her own making, one thing was crystal clear. America's sweetheart had just reminded everyone why she'd stayed at the top of Hollywood for 3 decades, and she'd done it by being more professional, more dignified, and infinitely more powerful than the person who'd tried to tear her down. The View would go to commercial break, but the damage was already done. Joy Behar had pushed too far, and Julia Roberts had pushed back with the full force of a woman who'd had enough. It was a masterpiece of controlled fury, and it was absolutely devastating.